Hi, I'm Frank Jernigan, also known as Franco. I've done a few teaching videos and a bunch of weekly meetings with Franco sweater knitters. And there's one video that I produced that has been by far the most popular and has been viewed at this point by over 100,000 times. There are some things that have come up in the almost 300 comments that have made me realize there were some things that I could have put in that video that were left out. So I'd like to correct that at this point and make this like an addendum to that video. So if you have not seen the video named Improved Magic Loop Technique in my channel, Knitting by Franco, then I suggest you go see that first and then come back and look at this video for some additional information. I will put a link to that video in the description below this one and a link to this one back in the description below that one. So I start that video with the understanding that you already know what Magic Loop is and how it works, and I don't cast on and I don't show how to start the Magic Loop. It was not intended to be a full course in how to do Magic Loop, but it almost turned into that. What I was really trying to do is simply show how an improved way of working it, which you can learn about when you see that. Two things have been requested over and over. One is, since the gap that occurs in the Magic Loop, well, the two gaps, since they move using this improved, quote, improved technique, how do you keep track of where the beginning of the round is? That's very simple. You use a marker. I'll show that. The other is, how do you start the Magic Loop? How do you cast on? How do you create the first loop? And especially, is it possible to use your improved technique on the cast on row? And the answer to that is yes. So let me show you how that all works. So I have cast on the number of stitches that I want to have in my round. And I am ready to start the magic loop so that I can knit those stitches in the round using this rather long circular needle instead of double pointed needles. The first thing I need to do is to divide the stitches into two groups, roughly the same number in each group, though the number is not so important that you need to count. You just sort of eyeball it and choose a place that's about halfway along in the middle of those stitches. You pull the needle out and then push the cable out, creating the first loop for Magic Loop. Keeping those stitches on the needle in the back, you then push the other stitches up onto the second needle. We're now ready to begin the join. The working yarn is attached to the back. We're going to knit the stitches on the front, and that's going to join the stitches to work in the round. Normally, a person would just pull this needle out and knit across that gap. But if you want to use the improved technique that I teach in the other video, you do that right here. You create the second loop 4 stitches back from the end on the back needle. Even though they're cast on stitches, it works exactly the same way. And now you're ready to begin knitting with the working yarn and join those two sections together. Here's a little added tip. If you want a more substantial join, rather than just having one strand between those two stitches, the simplest way that I know to do that is to cast on one more stitch than you want in your round. You have to have one extra stitch. You're going to lose a stitch here. And we pass the first stitch, the first cast on stitch from the left needle to the right needle, and then pass the second stitch on that needle over that slipped stitch. Now the working yarn is still attached to the last stitch, and when we knit the next stitch, there will be more than one cable, more than one strand of yarn between the two stitches. But before I do that, I'm going to mark my beginning of round with a stitch marker. So I put the marker on and I begin working the round. All the rest of it works just as I show in the other video. The marker now shows the beginning of round. If you have to do something like do decreases or increases at the beginning of round or at the end of round, that marker tells you where to do them. You're no longer dependent on this gap to show you where the beginning of round is. And I think that's where the question comes from, because most people who start knitting in the round see the gap as the place that is the beginning of round, and then they wonder how to keep up with it once it starts moving 4 stitches every time you knit across it. So that's the answer to the 2 questions and an extra tip for how to make the join a little bit more sturdy. I hope you enjoy and have happy knitting. Bye-bye.